Greetings on this 11th day of September 2009. I thought now is the time to bring up something controversial or thought-provoking or something, because a lot of other people are trying to remember this day. In 2001, I remember it as well. I remember when it happened, we were at work, and somebody announced that there was an attack in New York, World Trade Centers, and they brought a television into the office and set it up. Now, after all is said and done, there was a commission that came out and studied to find out the causes, the consequences, determine whose fault it was, and whatever. And for a while, that was accepted, but not entirely, because some people who are known as the Truth Movement feel that they've been misled or deceived, that there was something else behind it as well. So they're calling for a new investigation, one where they do not withhold evidence or suppress evidence to try and get the truth out. But I think the truth of what happened is pretty clear. Something happened and struck the buildings in New York and in Washington, and the skyscrapers fell down, and there was some damage at the Pentagon building, and that is true and cannot be denied. But I think what they're looking for in the long run is, okay, so here's the truth. Okay, that stuff happened. The truth is then that they want to find out is, how did it happen? Who allowed it to happen? Who made it happen? Was it an accident, or was it intentional? And if it was intentional, whose intentions? What's the idea behind it all? Was it just that those buildings were not profitable and they needed to be demolished, and to take them apart piece by piece would have taken too long and cost too much, and a standard explosive demolition could sort of work, but it would cause damage to other buildings nearby and probably some harm? So having convenient terrorist acts take care of it would seem to let a number of things off the hook in terms of liability. So that's an interesting possibility, but these are just possibilities. Nobody's ever able to prove these out. Some things that seem kind of odd were later on from witnesses who gave their testimony, but it wasn't included, that before the planes even struck, there was an explosion in the World Trade Center from below. And what was that all about? Then there was the explosion from above from the plane hitting. The building probably shook or swayed a little bit from that. And then later on, the buildings collapsed. Some people wonder why the buildings collapsed when they were very well built, very solid, and not all the floors were even lit up, just a couple of the floors on the upper levels. It seems kind of like they shouldn't have fallen down, at least not all the way, because you would imagine that the lower floors, which were not on fire, were still intact and solid. So you would imagine maybe the top few levels kind of collapsing and spilling over the edge, and then it would just kind of fizzle out. But it didn't happen that way. They just kind of fell inwards, which kind of implied, well, somebody would have had to compromise the structure. And based on some of the evidence in the dust that they found of something called nanothermite, which is able to melt through iron and girders quite easily, that may have been employed in some way. By whom and for what reason, yet to be determined. And there was cases of people hearing explosions at certain points, almost like something was going off to weaken the internal structures, and it was all pretty much blamed on those airplanes and the heat of the intense fire. Well, kerosene burns, but I'm not sure how hot it burns in an oxygen-starved environment. Next is that odd building 7 that went down. It wasn't right next to the Twin Towers. Building 6 was in its path as well. So why it collapsed is kind of a mystery. They say it was fires. How did the fires get in there? You see, there were these planes, and one of them didn't make it. There must have been a mutiny or a malfunction or something, and it crashed in Pennsylvania. Wondering if that Flight 93 may have been intended for World Trade Center Building 7, and when it didn't hit, they had all those things rigged up in there, so at some point they just had to say pull, and the building came down. And then they had to come up with an excuse of why that would happen. So that's kind of a mystery in that sense. If that Flight 93 was not intended for Building 7, think about this. What was it intended for? And you don't want to be in that building, because it may also have been compromised in some way. The other aspect of this, then, is the Pentagon, okay? And it was hit by another flying thing. They think it was an airplane, but there's contention about that. That there's different stories. And it's funny that in New York City they had so many videos of the whole thing from all different angles, almost like, you know, cameramen were posted and ready for it. Many, many videos. And yet, the Pentagon, a military building, you would think would have more surveillance and more cameras on it than anything, just about. There's very, very little images available of that incident. And it was peculiar that there was not much wreckage, debris leading up to the building, and a very small hole, implying that a big airplane would make such a little hole. It would leave a much bigger imprint. I mean, the wings and the engines and the tail should leave some sort of a mark or an evidence. So that is also a reason to question about what happened there exactly. That's why I think the Truth Movement wants to have a fresh new investigation with the current evidence. There are architects who also reviewed the official report based on their knowledge of buildings and demolition and structure, and I think they want to get that into there. But the conclusion is that at some point, once you determine what the truth is, what are you going to do with that truth? Are you just going to let it sit? Is it going to imply something? Is somebody going to be implied as being guilty? Is somebody going to be tried and found guilty? And what are you going to do about it? Is there something that might be huge and systemic, and it would require almost a total redo of something? I'm bringing it up because once you know what it is, you then sort of obligate yourself to do something about it, or accept it as that is the way things are. So that's basically my take on it. What do I think? I think it does probably bear more investigating, but I think at that point you have to decide what they find. What are you going to do with that information, with that knowledge? Is it going to lead to anything, or is it just going to be ignored? Or are you going to wake up a a sleeping monster and have a bigger problem on your hands than you ever had in the first place. So I'm just thinking that it's food for thought, and that's all I have to say about it for now.